Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, Excellencies, I am pleased to present my report on the situation of human rights in Somalia. I wish to thank the federal government for its commitments and comments on the report, which provided an update on the progress achieved by the federal government since my last visit in May 2024. Unfortunately, given that the comments were received beyond the deadline, they could not be integrated into my report. However, they have been published as an addendum to the report on the Human Rights Council's website. Mr. President, Excellencies, Somalia continues to show resilience in the face of persistent security and human rights challenges. In addition, the realization of economic, social, and cultural rights such as access to water, land, health, and education continues to face challenges, in particular with regard to the rights of women and children, internally displaced persons, persons with disabilities, people of minority clans, and other vulnerable groups. Climate change and natural disasters have also played a part in creating humanitarian crises, which cause suffering, loss of livelihoods, and human rights violations. Insecurity continues to be a major contributing factor to the deteriorating human rights situation. Civilians continue to bear the brunt of the conflict in central and southern Somalia as a result of Al-Shabaab attacks, as illustrated by the horrific 2nd of August 2024 attack at Lido Beach in Mogadishu that killed 37 civilians and injured over 210, including many young people. Those responsible for these atrocities against the civilian population must be prosecuted. All partners to the conflict, including international actors, continue to commit violations of international human rights and humanitarian law. Deadly inter-clan conflicts over access to natural resources and political power also continue exposing civilians to increasing violence and displacements. Mr. President, Excellencies, during my most recent mission to Somalia in May, in my interactions with government officials, I expressed concern at the delay in the operationalization of National Human Rights Commission. Similarly, I expressed concern at the lack of prioritization in the establishment of a Judiciary Commission and Anti-Corruption Commission, which have been pending for years across successive governments, delaying the formation of institutional mechanisms to carry out essential human rights work. I also regretted that despite the efforts made by the government to align the country's legislative framework with its international human rights obligations, some important legislations, including the Juvenile Justice Bill, the Child Rights Bill, and the Anti-Female Genital Mutilation Bill, are still pending at various stages. While I welcome the recent passing of the House of the People of the Federal Parliament of the National Disability Bill, I urge the Federal Parliament to adopt as a matter of priority the pending legislations to enhance protection of human rights in the country. On progress towards gender equality, I noted that women's participation in decision-making in Somalia has received some attention in recent months. This is manifested by the introduction in the Provisional Constitution of a new provision on ensuring women's participation in legislative assemblies and political parties. However, the absence of provisions for a minimum 30% quota for women's representation remains a challenge. Furthermore, Somalia's federal government's recent decision to rename the former Ministry of Women and Human Rights, substituting the word women with family, as well as the recent appointment of a former army general to head up this ministry, is surprising and could be interpreted as an attempt to write Somali's women out of political participation and leadership. Meanwhile, women continue to suffer the endemic problem of sexual and gender-based violence, in particular, the deplorable occurrence of gang rapes combined with homicide. I would like to reiterate my call to the government to adopt a systemic, legal and judicial response to prioritize the seriousness of this situation. Likewise, reports of abduction and forced recruitment of children and youth by fighting forces, challenges related to education and vocational training, coupled with unemployment and non-participation in public life, continues to hinder the full enjoyment of children and youth's rights. I welcome the recent launch in September 2024 of the National Action Plan for Children in Somalia as a positive step towards improving the situation of children. Excellencies, with regard to freedom of expression, notwithstanding the recent appointment of the members of the new Media Council in an effort to enhance the media landscape, allegations of harassment, arbitrary arrest, detention, and imprisonment of journalists and media workers remain a disturbing trend. While the official information bill, which is currently under consideration, can be considered a positive step, I call upon the federal government to ensure that the bill is fully in line with international human rights standards and succeeds in effectively providing all Somali citizens access to information held by public institutions without overbroad provisions hindering the objective of the law. On the death penalty, I am seriously concerned over the increase in the number of executions in recent months, sometimes as a result of judicial procedures that do not fulfill the most stringent guarantees of fair trial and due process that are required under international human rights. I am much more worried by information that death penalty has been carried out against minors. I wish to reiterate my call on the federal government to consider establishing an official moratorium on all executions as a first step towards fully abolishing the death penalty in Somalia. Mr. President, I wish to commend the people of Somalia for their resilience in the face of natural disasters and other challenges. Somalia has been a victim of a cycle of climate and natural disasters, which has exacerbated vulnerabilities and increased internally displaced population, now estimated to be 3,861,643 as of May 2024. The 2024 Somalia Humanitarian Needs and Response Plan requires US $1.6 billion to assist 5.2 people. I urge the international community to continue to support the Humanitarian Response Plan and reinforce the country's resilience against future disasters. Mr. President, Excellencies, in spite of these challenges, I wish to commend President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud and leaders of the federal member states for accelerating the constitutional review process, prioritizing Somalia's admission to the East African Community and its election to the Security Council, as well as implementing economic reforms and other efforts towards reaching the heavily indebted Poor Countries Initiative completion point, which resulted in the release of $4.5 billion to the country. All of these are being recognized at the international stage and send a strong signal about Somalia's commitment to protect human rights. Encouraging initiatives have been taken in response to the increasing insecurity, including the development of Somalia's security sector plan, which should support the emergence of effective Somali security institutions and the progressive handover of responsibilities from the African Union Transition Mission in Somalia to increase Somali ownership. The endorsement by the African Union Peace and Security Council of the concept of operations for the follow-up on the African Union mission in Somalia constitutes an important first step. Mr. President, as I conclude my statement, I'd like to highlight that Somalia is today at the crossroads between pursuing peace and reconciliation through enhancing security, strengthening international relations, and bridging the gaps in international and legislative agendas so as to create a better environment for boosting economic growth for all. I welcome the positive step that laid the foundation for a transition process to facilitate the implementation of Somalia's national and international human rights obligations and commitments, including my benchmarks and indicators. However, it is clear that we should not lose sight of the reality on the ground that continues to have devastating effects on Somalia's population, particularly the vulnerable groups. In this respect, it is my sincere hope that the international community will continue to support Somalia towards strengthening the federal government and federal member states, human rights institutions, and civil society organizations ahead of the transition. Finally, Mr. President, I am confident that the frank, constructive and open dialogue that characterized my engagement with the authorities and other stakeholders in Somalia during the last years will continue. I thank you for your attention.